hope you see my screen now. Something that says something about developer experience, is that right? All right. Yeah, and it's really interesting, exciting to see so many people that are interested in a developer experience and want to hear about that. So as Alexander said, my name is Tanja. I'm a business analyst at Thoughtworks, and I like to dig deep in tech stuff. And currently I'm very keen on bringing product thinking to tech-heavy products, whatever that is. That's why I'm currently part of a team that is building a modern cloud infrastructure platform. And we want to empower development teams to seamlessly deliver. And oh yeah, I live in Berlin and I like Berliner.
Hi, hi, I'm Jacob. Together with Tanja today, we will talk about the developer experience. I'm from Hamburg. I'm a hamburger, but I love pancakes even more. I once worked as a dev and moved on to become more of a product person now. And on my project, we are building an IoT platform to accelerate and simplify the software lifecycle for developers, so helping them to bring software faster onto vehicles. And the most obvious question to start this talk with, and the talk is named the Designing the Developer Experience, is obviously, what is a developer experience? And we found this definition by Sam German online. It's developer experience describes the experience developers have when they use your product. And as you can see in the comic below, this experience might be fun or might not be fun. So in this case, two devs are waiting that their code is being compiled. And they seem to have a lot of fun while waiting, but there seems to be also a person that is really unsettled to get them back to work. So question would be, is that a good developer experience or is it not? So today, we want to take a closer look on how we design developer experiences on our project. And we want to dig into some challenges we faced during the design process, and as well, what is the benefit for the business of a good developer experience. Usually on a project, Tanja, you have always this business stakeholder. He's from sales or she's from sales, and marketing has years of experience and exactly knows what the customer needs. Sometimes it's just a stakeholder, sometimes it's even your product owner, the person responsible to build the product. And this person always says, I know best what the user wants, and you don't need to ask the user, I can tell you. Building a technical platform and building something for developers, this shifts a little bit. And the know-it-all is sometimes the developers that are in your team, building with them, you're building together the developer experience. And they say like, hey, I'm a developer, trust me, I know best what other developers want. But this is not always true. The developers in your team not necessarily are matching the target group of developers that you might have with your product.
So how do you mitigate that somebody else thinks they know what your user actually wants? There's a technique that you probably already know, which is personas, to understand the needs of your users. And this actually also works for developers. So if you take a look to the right, you see the goals, behaviors, and needs of Detlef the Dev, which is one of our developer personas. So you can do this in a very workshop, lightweight fashion, looking at different personas, do this in a collaborative way, and really look at what is the pain points that developers have. And this is not only beneficial for business analysts or product people, this is also very helpful for the developers on your team who would then develop for other developers, because they might learn that their needs or the needs that their customers have is different from their own. This is something that at least that's experience that I made. And that works very well for developers. And then you can really mitigate that risk that developers know what other developers want. And I would like to encourage you also to look out for related personas, to identify goals they might have, or sometimes conflicting goals. in my project, what we did, we looked as well at product owners, we looked at compliance officers or security departments or security officers, because that's an important topic in infrastructure, apparently, to have it safe. And that really fostered very interesting conversations and made sure that we all also, that we are on the same page where we wanted to go. So let's take a look at the biggest pain points we found. In case of the cloud infrastructure project, billing was not transparent to the teams, so they did not really know what and how much money they spend for different services they were using. They were not very happy with monitoring tools that would help them to find out bugs or find out problems early on, even before it reached the customer. And by far the biggest one was the scaling of computing power was extremely slow and tedious.
And in our case, the developers mostly complained about manual steps. So having to take a lot of manual steps during their work process to get things done. And combined with a late or lack of feedback. So sometimes even they didn't receive feedback of how their applications perform or how tasks have been performed or tests, were really two big pain points for them. And what makes it even more worse for them is that the domain they are working on is so complex that onboarding and sharing knowledge with others was really difficult. So sharing how those manual steps work was quite hard for them. And we learned a lot about those pain points, as Tanja did in her project, by interviewing them. And we figured out, like, we should learn more about our developers and our personas we are targeting and what they are doing. So we created a developer journey and really digged into what is the job of a developer. And it's not only coding. So most of the developers we interviewed said, like, they always start, no matter what the context, if it's a totally new project or not, they start by setting up their developer machines, accessing developer portals or resources they need, setting up Git repositories, infrastructure, reading a lot of documentation and tutorials on how to actually start developing or where to start getting set up. And only after that, those developers started developing locally on the developer machines, on the laptops or on the computers. And they start by coding, they have to build the applications, they have to run them locally, then to test them, to debug them, to come to a state until they come to a version that they want to push and deliver. And in the case of Tanja, probably the developers would now push their application into the cloud and let it run there. In our case, they are developing for hardware, right? Like, they're developing for vehicles. So what they do next is they push it onto a test bench. They want to test their application that they've built on a test bench. And a test bench, you can imagine, is like a rudimentary setup of hardware, parts of a vehicle that you want to run your application on and test it. So they deploy the application there, they run tests, they inspect them, getting test results. And maybe they're even going back to the local development to do things more. And it goes on. After being on the test bench, they move a stage further and test it on a test vehicle. So seeing if everything works as a full. And only after that, they go to a point where they say, like, okay, I'm coming to a state where I want to package my application, maybe with other applications, and release them to the customer to make the customer happy. And what we learned throughout learning about the jobs of a developer is that some of those jobs are highly complex or are very critical. A deployment to a test vehicle is a very critical task. But for example, running an application locally is a very highly frequent job. So they're doing it several times a day. And if this job is painful and has a lot of manual steps, then I would say that's a bad developer experience. So we used this developer journey not to only get a common understanding on how we can help those developers, but also to figure out, like, how and where can we help the developers best. And we sliced our teams in a vertical manner so they can help developers with specific jobs. And also, just as Tanja, we learned throughout the process, they are not alone. Not every company has those DevOps teams or teams where that are cross-functional. Sometimes they are siloed, and there are release managers or testers involved that are also part of this journey to bring an application into use. And another thing we've learned is talking to those developers is that they have different user interfaces than we would usually expect from our users. So yes, they have a developer portal, a visual graphical user interface, a web application that we are usually building, but they are also using user interfaces like command line interfaces. If you watch The Matrix, you've probably seen the green text on the black background going really fast, where the developers do their magic. They're using command line interfaces because they don't want to get out of their environment they're working in. They're using their IDEs, their development tools, and the terminals, and opening a browser and doing some clicks is just not efficient for them. There are also APIs, application programming interfaces, so directly contacting interfaces of other systems to maybe write some scripts or automate stuff. And thinking about what user interfaces also developers are, there are even more. Libraries, open source code, documentation. Those are all things the developers need to do their job. So designing for a developer or design in general, it's not just about pixels. And I took the example of the CLI for this talk. And for our developers, we are developing a CLI, a command line interface. And on the right side, you can see a terminal screenshot. And I've run the GitHub CLI and asked for specific help for a specific command. And as you can see, you get an output that is only text-based. So this user interface is mostly text-focused, but you still can see that it's very well structured. It has some headlines, it has some kind of tables, and it's really useful because it not only explains me how to use it, but it also gives me examples or even learn more, a direction where I can get more information. So a developer might not use this command all the time or is new to the CLI and he needs help. So one of our design guidelines that we came up on our project is always provide help. So whenever I introduce a command in the command line interface we're developing, provide help so that the developer at which point he ever is gets help and knows what the next steps is and how to use them. And the challenge of developing those command line interfaces is, as pointed out, it has to be efficient to use for the developer. It has to fit in their workflow of work. It has to fit into the steps they are doing. But on the same side, it has to be easy to learn. Easy to learn, but efficient to use. So, right, having a command that is really expressive and exactly explains what this command will be doing might be very long. 240 characters to type as a command, that's not efficient. So it's always the challenge between being memorable but typable. And we came up with a whole bunch of design guidelines for the command line interface, also showing progress or being fancy. You can't put pictures into the command line, but you can do some ASCII art, some small robot comic, or a fancy progress bar that helps the developer and gives them a more pleasant experience. You can even use colors. So there are some things to even help the developer with the command line interface. And designing user interfaces for developers is not the only challenge if you create a developer experience. And we have been facing more challenges during the design process of such developer experiences. And Tanja brought a question for you.
Yes, I'm a BA, so I like questions, of course. And the question I have for you is, would you invest in something you do not understand? Most probably not. So with most products, we focus on translating from business to tech, right? So that means we explain user needs to development teams. My experience with tech-heavy products is that the translation from the tech to the business is probably even more relevant. So why is that? And that's why I asked you this question. The business needs to understand what they spend their money for. And understanding is the prerequisite to get buy-in from business stakeholders. So this could be either money, or it could also be time, or helping promote your project, right? And now you might be wondering, so how can this be done, this translation, without doing extensive training with business stakeholders. And I wanted to do a little experiment for you, and I have another question, but this time I want to know the answers from you. So if you now look into, I think it's in the chat window, I will show you a little survey. So do you know what transit services are? And please let me know if you do. So click yes or say no, or kind of, which means, I heard about it, but I couldn't really explain it to somebody else. And numbers are coming in. And actually, I wanted to ask Jacob, we have done this for some time. Do you actually know what transit services are?
If you wouldn't have explained it to me, I wouldn't know, but I think I should be capable of explaining to you as well now, but I will leave it to you.
Okay, so I think there's more answers coming in. Let's give it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. Okay. So we have 76% no, 6% say yes, and 19% say kind of. I can share that with you as well. So that's actually good, because I would like to test now if I can explain you some technical concept within a short period of time. And I would like to explain to you transit service apparently in 2 minutes. And as you have already known probably from my introduction, I work on a cloud infrastructure project, and we help applications or teams to move their apps from client premises, so from the client network, to a public cloud provider. So how does that look like? You usually have an app on the client side that is connected to different systems, various systems. I named them here A, B, C, X, Y, Z. It can be all different kinds of things. So what happens then is the app is moved over to the cloud. What happens to the connection to these systems? So you might think, let's just rewire them. But you have to take into consideration that now you have traffic that is crossing the internet. So you need to have a secure connection. And also you have to deal with a lot of firewalls and firewall requests to get access to these individual systems. And all this process is usually a long process, at least in bigger companies. So what my team did is we built something like this. So we established some kind of a socket on the cloud provider side and took care of all of the infrastructure that's behind it. So all the VPN connections, all the firewall requests, the connections to all of these systems. So all that the teams that were maintaining this app had to do is actually have some kind of a plug and plug this into our socket. And in an instance, they had connections to the systems they had been connected to while they were still in the client network. This was quite important, as we were working on that for quite some time, and stakeholders were wondering, oh, what are they doing? You know, there's a question probably, oh, why does that take so long? And this made it really clear to them that there's a lot of work to be done. And it really helped us also gaining the empathy for what we were doing. And if you want to use some fancy tech words for what you have just seen, you would call the sockets endpoint services, and the plugs would be the endpoints. So I'm not sure if I was successful in my explanation. If not, let's check later in the Q&A, or also feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or any social media, and we can figure that out. That would be really interesting. And what's basically what do I want to tell you is using drawings or using pictures from the normal world can help you in doing this translation. Also try to draw a lot on the whiteboard. That helped me as well a lot. So boxes, arrows, why is there a box, why is there an arrow, often fosters the conversation and helps to create understanding with non-technical users. So this is one way of doing it. Another friend you have is user stories, because how would you explain something to somebody that you yourself have not understood? And there I found user stories very beneficial. And if you look to the right, that's a backlog where I started out with my team. So when I came into that team, there were a lot of developers, and probably, you know, there is these kind of tech tasks. It's tickets in your favorite project management tool, maybe Jira or something else. And it's just like a cryptic kind of title. So what we did is I forced the developers to explain why we were doing it, and that's the orange stickies. So the orange stickies are basically the purpose, what this task serves for. And this was very interesting because it also helped us to understand why we were doing things and what we were aiming for and what's the problem we were trying to solve, which also was important for the developers because sometimes they were even not agreeing on that. And it helped us later prioritize, do we have to solve this problem now or can we do that later? And if I can show you a concrete example from the green stickies, so one of those could be story title, Terraform plan to apply. What the heck is that? Thanks to BA. If you have a conversation and then have a story, it might look like this. As a developer, I want faster pipelines so that I can reduce waiting time and resources used. Something that somebody that works in our area can understand, I assume. And all you have to do basically is watch out for the why, look out for the reason. Even technical stories have a reason. Sometimes developers say, oh, but I first have to analyze and do a lot of things before we can write a story. But no, you know initially why you are doing things, and then you can look at how you are doing things. So a recommendation would be try to defer the conversations about the hows. I think that's pretty difficult for developers because they already see the solutions for what they are trying to do. So if you are both writing the story and are the ones that implementing it, something might trigger in your head, but try to push this apart. This can come later. If you have a reason or a why that you do not really understand, or we think it's a bit lame, it's not the real why, think about the 5 whys. So ask again, why is that why? And you will most probably or very surely come to the real reason. But all this is provided you have a proper story conversation. So really ask a lot of questions and make sure that the team is having a conversation to find out what we were doing. And again, as I said before, I thought I was sometimes the only one that did not understand what was supposed to be done with that card. But I also realized that then after some kind of conversation, some developers in the team said, no, but I understood this different, and I thought this is done for XYZ for a different reason, or we're doing a different kind of job in that ticket. And that was helped really to create a shared understanding and move into one direction. So that's all about tools and techniques. There's a lot more, but this is the one that really worked for me. But let's look at people, building relationships. Even in technical projects, this is very important. So as an example, I'm working in the infrastructure world, and you might have heard about DevOps, which is a mindset. And it's that mindset where it's no longer that developers program something and then they throw it over the fence to another team that's doing the operations part. Now this should go seamless, and both should actually learn from each other to make the whole thing running seamlessly. And this requires that people that have most probably not collaborated before work very closely together. And this is paramount for the success for infrastructure projects, because it's not only the implementation, it's also a lot of mindset best practices, right? And that you learn best if you collaborate closely. As an example from my project, we always do in Thoughtworks, before we start, we do some kind of a series of workshops with our clients to create a shared understanding. In my case, we invited a lot of enterprise architects, product owners, developers from different teams. What else was there? Compliance personas. We tried with finance, but it didn't really work for us. They were not too interested, but we had really interesting conversations, and that's important to clarify a lot of things before you actually start. So they understand what we try to achieve, and vice versa. So we did that well and had interesting conversations, but a few weeks in, we had to get in touch with a networking department of that client. And as you've seen earlier with the transit services, we have to do a lot of wiring, right? And needless to say that this meeting did not go very well because we had not invited them to our workshops. And in hindsight, this I would have done differently. So we then had conversations, and after a few meetings, everything worked fine. And now we have a really good relationship, but we had first to learn what their world is. They had to understand what we are trying to achieve. So really building relationships makes your life a lot easier. And another challenge, last but not least in this section, how do you measure developer experience? How do you measure that you create value for your customer? And while I researched this talk, I found that it seems pretty easy with external platforms. So let's imagine you have a website and you need to integrate a payment provider. So you go to that payment provider and there's tons of resources for developers out there. And then developers start to connect and try out at different APIs, for example. And then you could measure. And the go-to matrix I found was for these kind of platforms, what's the weekly active users? What's the time to first hello world, which is like the first really established connection. So it's almost like a website where you can measure the interactions with your users. But the challenge that both Jacob and I am having, we are working with internal platforms. So there is no exterior interface to the outside world, and developers have no choice. So usually a platform is rebuilt or a new platform is built, and then everybody has to move to the new platform because the old platform would be shut off. So there is no choice trying out, or if I don't like that one, I try another one. So there it's a bit hard really to find metrics. What we opted for now is the so-called Net Promoter Score. You might know that from other websites where you have a little window that pops up and asks you, oh, would you recommend this to a friend or to your family? And we did this in form of a survey or questionnaire that we sent anonymously to developers, product owners, and they could rate the platform according to different criteria we had. So on a scale from 1 to 10, they could rate how is the availability, how is the onboarding experience, how is the support we are providing. And that it could help us really to find out if we provide value. Another tiny challenge we had was, what would we actually measure it against? Because there was no base value. So what we did before we actually started migrating teams to the new platform, we did a survey, the same survey, regarding the experience with the old platform. So we asked again the same questions, and then we got results, and now we can use this as a baseline to measure against the survey we do as soon as they're on the new platform. So this is a lot of metrics. Again, measuring, you always think about numbers, but of course, what I still want to mention, you can also do qualitative research, and that helps you also to find out if you're creating value. For example, what we are currently doing, we found out that the documentation we have, users are still struggling it. So no new teams that onboard onto the platform, they have a lot of questions. We have a lot of questions in the support channel. And we are now really working on that and sitting together with developers to see how they run through the documentation, or how easily do product owners find some kind of settings they have to set. And so there is hard numbers, but there's also the qualitative metrics that would help you find out if you're really creating value to your users. So you've seen a lot of challenges. This is always a lot of work, a lot of conversations. Why would a business actually invest in that?
And there are several reasons to invest in a good developer experience. We listed some of them, but we brought 3 examples that are either from our project or a really interesting example, we think. There are several companies that rely on tech for their business that are investing a lot of money into really developer platforms and even departments helping the rest of the developers in their company. But there are also benefits that other companies can get from building a good developer experience. And in our case, when you remember, one of the biggest pain points that the developers had developing for an application for a vehicle was manual steps. And we literally are still removing manual steps for them. So if you remember in the developer journey, after those developers developed an application version on their local machine, they want to test it on hardware. And they have to get up out of the comfy chair to go to those test benches. And those test benches might not even be on their table or in their room. They might be even in a different building. So they have to get up, leave their building, go into another building, take their laptop or USB stick with them with the application version to go there and update this application or deploy this application on the hardware. And it comes even worse. There are not enough test benches for all those developers. So they sometimes even need to book a test bench, only have 1 hour of time to deploy the application and test it. And the worst thing that happens to them is they go there, plug in their laptop, start the deployment, and the deployment fails. So they can't even start testing. So they get all the information they can get from the test bench, scratch all the logs from there, go back, leave the building, go into the next building, sit back into their comfy chair and figure out what went wrong. And with our platform, we are enabling them to update, have remote updates on those test benches. So they don't have to get out of their comfy chair, also losing the exercise of going to the next building, but it's much more comfortable, and automating those tests. So right now they have to wait besides those test benches until the tests are completed. And all those steps and all those backs and forth between the test benches takes a lot of time. And currently it takes 2 to 3 weeks to test one single application version on the specific hardware it has to run on. And by enabling them to remote update those things and to have the tests automated, it only takes 2 to 6 hours now for them. They just upload their new version and it will be automatically updated remotely, automatically tested, and they get just the test result. So the developer gets really great experience by having faster feedback cycles. He gets much, much more information faster on how his application performs in an update, but also in testing. And the business benefits and a reduced time to market. So our platform targets to speed up the whole life cycle for the software, and reducing a critical part in that from 2 to 3 weeks to 2 to 6 hours is critical for the business. And on the plus side, which is an added benefit of that by trying to speed it up and having faster feedback cycles, we're promoting higher quality. Developers are starting now to test more because they can test more and they're not bound to the restrictions and constraints they had before. And this is how we are helping the business with a good developer experience. And Tanja has also an interesting benefit for the business on her project.
Yeah, talking about speed. Speed is flexibility, or flexibility means speed, that way around. And if you remember the top 1 pain point we saw earlier, which was the slow scaling of computing power, this is how it went on the old platform. Teams that wanted to do load testing to see if their app is behaving when traffic increases had 3 options. They could just do it, which might lead to downtimes for the other team services because they were just using their resources partly. Or second, they could coordinate with these teams to find out when this might be possible, when this wouldn't do harm. Or number 3, They could apply for more resources via email, wait for a week or even more until the request is picked up and finally processed. So as you can imagine, all these options actually decrease the speed of teams, and they do not incentivize to experiment and try things out like we know that from HR development, right? So now teams can do self-service. So by raising a pull request, they can scale their computing resources themselves. And this can be done in a very, very short time frame. So they can really act independently. So self-service for team leads to independence or to autonomy. And autonomy in turn speeds up time to market, which is something that we as business people like, because we want to show features early to the users, because only then we know if customers really like it, right? And also it increases innovation. So as I have shown in this example, if you cannot easily test something out, you're probably not doing it. So all we actually need to do is provide a supportive infrastructure and the right tools so that developers can do their job in a flexible and easy kind of way. And one thing I also forgot in my example, cost savings also were interesting in that case, because before they had actually to make whole subscription for a month. So if I wanted to just to test something out for half a day, I needed to pay for the whole month. Now I can do this really by the minute. So again, flexible and easy to use tools is something that benefits the business. So we only picked 3 benefits. There is more, but these were the ones where we said this is the most important ones, or the ones that we think provide the most value. And when I researched this talk, I Googled around a little bit, and on Quora, the question and answer platform, I found the question, what should every software developer look for in a job? And one of the answers that somebody posted was, I want to work for a company which is open for modern technologies. Sounds pretty obvious, right? It isn't. Looking at job offers here in Germany, I see that most companies prefer established technologies which are at least 30 years on the market. So I think this makes it pretty clear what developers are looking for. So if you are a company and you have a really old tech stack and you don't invest in modern technology and in tools that help developers actually provide value for your company, it might be very hard to find good people. It's hard for you to attract IT top talent. And not only attracting them, you also might have a hard time retaining the good developers that you already have. And that was also an interesting experience that Jacob and myself made, because both in the clients we were working on with our projects, after a time, we realized that developers from other departments wanted to work with us. They wanted to work in our project because they really liked what we were doing. They saw things were now faster and easier, and this created really a pull to work with us. So attracting and retaining talent is something that you can only have if you look at developers' experiences and take care of that.
So developer experience matters not only to the developer, but it should also matter to the business. It has a lot of benefits for the business, as we've seen today. And one really important bit is, with the question Tanja asked, would you invest in something you don't understand? So designing a developer experience and building a developer platform or something similar, it's really important to translate from tech to biz. So really investing time to learn about your target group, the developers, and learn to explain and build a shared understanding also with business stakeholders, so they know what they're investing in and why they should do that. And developer experience for us is just user experience for developers. as you've seen, with using the similar design tools or things like personas, customer journeys, as we did for other users. So you can start using the design tools you know, and you can start by doing user research, or you could call it developer research then, and talking to developers. So developers are users too, so try to treat them that way. And they are also designers. If you remember in the beginning, you have developers in your team that are building together with you the platform, and they are already domain experts. They already know what development is like. They might not explicitly know what the developer in the target group wants and needs and has for pains, but take them along. They can help you to cross-functional build and design a good developer experience. Thank you so much for listening until now, and we hope you enjoyed the YConf until now, and we are happy to take now a lot of questions. I already see a red 6 blinking below.
Thank you very much, Tanja and Jacob. That was really, really great to see, and I really love that we take more like that. We talk a bit more about making that user experience for developers more explicitly, because we have so many more technical products, and I think we just build, and yeah, everybody knows what we build about, but we often forget to ask the why, and also to make the experience for everybody involved much more explicit and much better than they have been before. So taking some questions out of the Q&A, and I think people are now starting to write, which is really nice. It's really like the first one is, and I think you already answered that in the end, like developer experience and user experience, is it not actually the same? But why is it different? Why does it have a different name?
That's a really good question. We also came across this question while researching for this talk. And I think, Alexander, you just named it perfectly. Developers didn't get much attention for some time, and they are using products as everybody else does as well, and pointing out that those products also need to be designed for their purpose and for their jobs to be done and their needs is very important. So there's some trend going on to explicitly call out developer experience and call out developer platforms and products to bring this also to more awareness to, as we said, to the business stakeholders that need to invest in those tools and even methods. Yeah.
Thank you. The other one from Matthias, he has like the question around like the developer journey you showed in the beginning, and also like he asked if there's a blind spot, like the aspects about like working like with design people, having those communication elements that involves like the reality of the life and daily experience of developers. How does this relate in this whole element?
Yeah, so I think that's a good catch from Matthias. So there's like a real difficulty in building something for developers, because you always need to differentiate between your users, the developers, and what you are doing as designers and developers building a product for them. And the key to it is really like trying to do everything cross-functional, doing user research, or talking to the personas, the developers of your target group, with designers, with your developers, to figure out what is actually what they need and how can we help them best. But from another perspective, and I think this is also what Matthias is referring to, as I read the question correct, in the developer journey, the one that I showed is quite simplistic or generic, and there are a lot of different personas involved. And yes, also those development teams, they also have designers or have POs or release managers that are part of the software lifecycle. And a really crucial thing and really difficult thing is, if you're building technology to help them, at the same time, you need to also to figure out what is their way of working. How are they communicating right now? And do I make the communication between them now worse by introducing this technology, or can I even help to improve that they are collaborating even more? And I think Tanja pointed it out in one of her cases, that bringing in together the network people, the networking experts, together with the infrastructure people that haven't been talking before, that is exactly what is happening if you try to create a modern developer platform, that you loosen up boundaries between all those things and try to do things together.
And I just wanted to stress, I mean, as we said earlier, developers are designers too. So when you say designers, I think we are all designers. So I don't even want to use this for a particular group of people. And I've seen a lot of workshops where we have drawn and did a lot of visual thinking on whiteboards. And that was actually started by developers. So there was a lot of designing systems done in the workshops that I was part of, at least.
Maybe to also add one more thing that just came to my mind. What is also really interesting is that we're including in our platform some kind of community character. So really not only offering things as a self-service, so developers are free or the users are free to do whatever they like and at the point in time where they need it, but also building a community around it where those developers can connect and talk about how they are using the platform or contributing tools. And what we've seen after doing a hackathon with our target group, they picked up already our like proof of concept tools and built scripts and tools on top of that we are now integrating back into the platform, because there's more need just in that those more developers want and need those things. Yeah.
Thank you very much for answering all those questions around there. And there are many more around there, also around domain-driven design and how you really come up with those elements. And I would like to take them also to Twitter. I know, Jacob, you are active on Twitter, and I think you collaborate with Tanja in answering those questions on there. So we provide the answers there. I have seen also that Jan and Rebecca, they really also answered the questions we couldn't answer in the Q&A on Twitter. I'm going to share the link in a minute, so you can read them up there and you can continue the conversation and the follow-up question and thank yous on Twitter itself.